So moving on to Martina Donnelly from PwC, which, as you know, is one of the big accounting firms in the world. And is your presentation ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Excellent. Good. Over to you.
I'm starting with a blank screen.
Yeah.
I'm starting with a blank screen. And what I want to say to you is scientists call the area or the zone that our planet sits within the Goldilocks zone. And it's based on this children's story, which you might have heard of, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And the child in that tries things out, and she goes, oh, it's too hot, oh, it's too cold, until she gets it just right. And our planet is in that zone, not too hot, not too cold, where the blend is just right, so that our planet could grow and flourish. And that's what we're trying to do with our blended learning, which is to pick those things, not too much of one thing, not too little of another, to get it just right. So we're looking at, how do I get the right level of input? Too much, it's too expensive for the firm, takes too much time out. People get overwhelmed. Too little, and we go straight into practice or putting it into practice, and then the practice doesn't become focused. It's not good practice. So how do we get that blend just right so that our learners can grow and flourish? So we're looking at all these different elements that we can take. And the other thing that we were doing as well was we were faced with project management. Now, when you say project management, it's not the one that's the most dynamic and exciting. People don't leap to it in the way that they will leap towards when we say there's a leadership program with team-building activities. So we're faced with this challenge. How do we get that right blend of all these elements that's going to give them an insight into project management, but how are we going to make it fun and engaging? Because project management, I think for a lot of people, is actually a fairly core skill. It doesn't matter even if you've got an official project, PMO, so a project management office, you still need project management skills. So it's a very core skill, but it's not one that people normally jump to. So we're looking at what are the different elements we can use? How can we blend them in just that right way and keep it challenging and exciting? And what's more, in our organisation as well, people need that step up in their project management skills, that ability to do more at different times. So it's hard for us to do a scheduled program and get it just in time for the right person. So the solution that we went to was trying to see how could we actually fit the blend within a simulation that would be available on demand and still have those elements of practice, of input, of feedback, of reflection, so those key things that make something work, but actually do that all within a digital wrapper, which is available for people to just pull down when they need. So we went for an immersive simulation. So this immersive simulation uses a story, so it's a sustained story. And like all good stories, it starts with a kind of crisis in there. So, you know, the princess needs to be rescued, the ring has gone missing, the battle plans need to be delivered, yeah? So we've got this story where the PR disaster has happened and our project management person comes in. And just like with stories, the way that we've got this blended learning to work is it starts off and you solve the immediate crisis and lo and behold, it turns out that there's a much bigger picture there that you're going to need to cope with. So within our simulation already, we've got the first crisis and then an opportunity for the learner to then move further. Our hero, our project manager, doesn't travel this alone. So a key part of us getting this to be a blend is what we were going to do about the feedback. So that feedback, so after they've had some input, they've tried it out because they're in this simulation, how are they going to get good feedback? So we've got various mechanisms within our blend that's going to give us that feedback. So we use right at the beginning an opportunity to pick out a coach. We've actually got 3 coaches, and I'm going to show you a demo, and you can see the coaches that we did, but we went for diversity, and you'll see why. And you get to pick your coach, and that coach is available throughout the simulation. At points, you can click on it to actually just get some feedback, get some input. Or I've done something, I'm going to go and just see what they've got to say about it. We've also got, as part of the blend, a guru character, so guru characters. So the idea here is that lovely bit of the blend where you're learning from others. So we have the guru actually doing some of the activities. You have a chance to observe what they do. You then have a chance in the simulation to do it yourself. You have a chance to compare what you've produced as one of your outputs with what perhaps the guru has produced. And again, what we're trying to get across here is the nuances that even in project management, there's not a right and wrong answer. You know, sometimes there is when you're budgeting, but anyway, there's not a right and a wrong answer, so we're trying to get those nuances. The other reason why we went for a simulation is we were looking not just the practical things about being able to record risks, but actually that sixth sense that you develop as a project manager to know when I'm speaking to somebody and they've said something, getting that little alarm bell ringing. All right, okay, so that's actually a risk. So we're using the characters to feed in and help you develop your behavioural skills as well around project management. So in our blend, this immersive story, plenty of feedback, our hero travelling with these people who are helping them, telling them how to do things, and we've also got a dynamic feedback mechanism. So we've created a very clear framework about these are the things that we've found through experience and practice. We've used our subject matter experts to come up with a framework that says, if you can get these things right, then these things are really going to help you in your project management skills. So our feedback is against these 12 things, and you have a dynamic score so that you can see how you're managing to do against these. At any point, you can access that and see how you're doing. We're also getting that bit of the blend which says you need to reflect about this yourself, you need to think about it and think how you're going to apply it yourself. So we're also asking people to self-score against it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop speaking now. I'm going to give you a chance to actually just see some of these features that I've been talking about in a little video. I'm going to take the black screen off. You're going to just momentarily, because we couldn't quite load it, so I'm going to put it on like that. There we go. And so you're starting off with the first crisis of the story.
Clayton, I've been trying to get hold of you. Where are you?
I'm already at the airport, Thomas. Heading home. Decided to get an earlier flight back. What's wrong?
I'm Michelle. Welcome to the team. It's really nice to meet you.
Well, enough from me. Is there anything you'd like to ask? I'll answer what I can, but I've got to head off soon.
And we really need to get the overall.
Hey, didn't know whether or not you were in that meeting you were telling me about last night. Well,
I always think carefully before taking a call in a...
Hi there. I'll be on hand to provide you with practical tips and advice.
When I'm staffing projects, I want to make sure I prioritize our efforts to get the best results.
Breaking news. Sante voted best boutique hotel chain in our annual poll.
Just a little bit of a flavour of some of the things that we were actually trying to include in there. So you'll have seen the coach, the guru, the 12 elements framework. What we're also doing in there is just some of those things that we're bringing there. So just the variety of interactions that we were trying to use to just make it feel really like real life activity. So we've got the use of the iPad, the phone. We've got, like, you saw the little magazine where you could actually do, like, what are those little cosmopolitan little quiz type things. And towards the end, you'll also have seen that we've actually included some games. So one of the characters says, I'm going to be sending you some games to help embed the learning. There's some serious games. We're using them as little reflection points actually within the simulation itself. So the game comes up, and they all have a key learning point they're trying to get across, but in a very fun, quick, captured way. So almost that I've learnt, I've had some input, I've had a chance to experience it, and this is almost like my quick questions built into the game. So I wanted to just give you, some of you might have done a simulation before, and you may be familiar with some of these things that we've done, but here's some of the top things that I think we thought about when thinking about that blend, so when we were trying to get that Goldilocks zone of the right blend. So the first thing we thought about was just being a really, really clear framework around that you're building your feedback around. So I know we say we want to have really clear learning objectives, really clear what our learning points are. We also found just getting that really, really clear framework for the feedback to be built around. We used input from lots of our subject matter specialists. We eavesdropped on their normal conversations that they would be having when they're discussing stuff. So we're in a privileged position where we do have subject matter specialists on project management. We got them in a room, we recorded them speaking about it, we hung around when they were having cups of coffee and just said, just tell us, what are the chief things that you find difficult? And just having recorded it and have got their actual language, we were then able to use that language and just build that in. You'll notice that at various points you had options where you're choosing what is it that I should actually do. Branching gets complicated very, very quickly. So my top tip is be really, really clear on your characters. Know how your character is going to respond. Know the background. Even if you're not going to put all the background in your simulation, think about how they would respond, because then that's going to come across when you're writing the character. When you're mapping out what they're going to do, keep handwritten diagrams, keep flow charts, look at each branch as it goes through so that you've just got that clear chance to see what's happening to build up the story. Look for examples elsewhere. So we went on the internet, looked at the games that some of our graduates were playing just on their machines, especially when we were thinking about which games to use. Look for those games, think, how can we adapt this? Can we take a learning point and actually use this game to help get that learning point across within that short bit? Again, just bring it to that blended bit there. So the other thing that we wanted to do was just recognize the fact that people have different perspectives. They have different preferences. So what we've always tried to do within there is to nuance the answer. So when you've got the option, so if your preference is, actually, I think I've nailed this and I don't need the feedback, we're not going to force you to have the feedback. When you see your score, you'll see whether you've done well or not, according to it. But you're not going to force you to have to listen to the feedback if you don't want to. I personally don't like audio. I turn off the audio and read the transcripts rather than listen to an expert speaking. So the more we could build in preferences, so in fact the more that the learner could actually think about the blend of how it was given to them and give them that flexibility, the better. The other thing that always constantly amazes me is we're obviously a global firm and we're very aware of cultural differences. But actually, when you're doing a simulation and you're hoping that this is going to go out and just give people that real immersive experience, just being very, very sensitive to how something culturally will land differently. Even just simple things like phrases that I've used, like Goldilocks zone, may mean nothing to somebody else if they don't know the story. So I apologize if anybody in the audience is going, Goldilocks. I think I am probably out of my time, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Martina. Well, we've seen two very different perspectives on blended learning there, but lots and lots of food for thought. We've looked in the first presentation very much at the implementation issues of building that blended learning culture. And then in the second presentation, we've seen an example of a very sophisticated digital intervention, which I think is, so that should give us lots of food for thought. So both of our speakers would be really, really keen to let you dig in and find out a bit more about why they did what they did and what happened along the way. So a question here.
Both presentations were exciting in terms of how it could apply in places, but I was very struck when you were putting the business case. There were lots of benefits you were trying to make, and at the end you described success in terms of completion, which I think sort of made me a bit disappointed. I'm hoping there's more depth in terms of what success is. Was it more efficient in its delivery? Did it have greater impact in terms of what Linklaters was trying to do? Because I think 98% success was a bit of an anticlimax for me in terms of all the other excitement you were bringing in terms of presentation.
Yeah.
So it's to try and get a bit more of that detail.
Yeah. So I mean, that was one kind of element, obviously. But I mean, what we were looking to do was to get an understanding across the firm of what blended learning was. So people just didn't understand the term. They hadn't heard it. They didn't understand what that benefit was. And so actually, you know, it's the start of a journey for us, particularly in our sector. And so, you know, the fact that we had partners asking their lawyers, you know, I understand you're going on this new blended program and, you know, come and talk to me about how it was just, you know, unheard of in our culture. And so I suppose the biggest success is that actually we have blended learning as a language. We have the business coming to talk to us about, well, actually, could I blend this program, or I have this business challenge? Can learning support me? You know, I want to develop some online learning, which is just a discrete standalone piece. How do I go about doing that? You know, it's about generating this inquisitiveness around blended learning, and we were just starting from a blank sheet of paper. The 98% is just there to kind of demonstrate that, you know, actually, look, our classroom attendance wasn't that fantastic. It was starting to dip. lo and behold, we implement blended learning and you know, some magic happens. But it takes time, and we're just at the start of that journey.
Do you want to comment on that, Martina?
I just echo, this is coming at the end of what we've been establishing as or experimenting with various different types of blend. So we've been looking at 12-week programs, which have had face-to-face elements, self-study, again, the social side of doing it, and that sort of blend. So this is just one example. And it takes a long time. It takes a time for the organisation to understand what it means. Yeah. And also it's interesting because it's one of those things that you have to keep going back to the organisation about to make them understand exactly what the success is, because people's memories are very short. So now that we've got people who automatically do what used to be called pre-reading, and I think you made a great point there, so they're now doing their self-study, whereas before that was unheard of, but now that's kind of like taken for granted a little bit. But, you know, a while ago it wasn't. So.
Thanks very much. I will use the mic just to make the questions really clear.
I'm curious about the first speaker operating in a global environment, really. I'm wondering, did you have any issues to do with language? Because the majority of my learners, I work in a global environment, they don't speak English.
We didn't actually, because we have common English as a commonplace language across the global firm, although we are diversifying into some more regions, particularly kind of across China. So that may be something that we need to look at in terms of translation, but it hasn't been an issue for us as yet. I don't know, Martina, I know you're a lot bigger than we are, whether you translate or...
No, English, again, is our first language. However, even in using English, again, it's just being sensitive to which English words you use, and again, avoiding, as far as possible, phrases or comments which are really very specific.
Okay, actually, there was a hand up just earlier. I passed the mic over. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you for your inspiring presentation, the both of you. I'm really curious about evaluation of learners, and in particular also in learning outcomes. Did you evaluate it, or did you some research on it? Can you please tell me us something more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, we're at the start of the journey with blended learning, but certainly, you know, that going back to the learners and talking to them about how they've used the skills that they've learned across that program in their day-to-day work is increasingly important, and something that we are starting to do more of. I'll be honest, we haven't done a huge amount of it yet. But certainly that the idea of the blend supports that a little bit more, talking to their partners about you know, this speed to experience, because if we're providing that learning to them just in time, then we're looking to increase their speed to experience, particularly across a global organisation where we have offices which are very, very dispersed.
Yeah,
there's a question just coming, and you can come next.
Can I just ask, what was the actual motivation behind deciding to do blended? And the second question, is if you can answer both, is one was a very immersive experience, the other was about starting this journey about communicating what is blended learning. So in both your cases, did you look at what the ROI is? Like, do we manage projects better now? Do we have better qualified lawyers? So that sort of perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, from our perspective, it was, as I said, when I first started, the majority was just classroom training. But you know, lawyers' time is incredibly precious. It's, you know, I've worked historically in the Big Four before, and there is a real emphasis on time. So increasingly, we were finding it difficult to get lawyers into the classrooms. Our programs were 2-3 days. And we just saw that curve diminishing, that engagement diminishing. Also, we're diversifying across the globe in terms of the number of offices and regions that we're operating in. Some of those offices are very small. And that learning just wasn't getting out to our lawyers at that point when they needed it. You know, and also we saw our clients, you know, out there doing blended learning and using technology. And you know, we need to be up with our clients. We need to be ahead of our clients. So those were some of the motivations. For me, I'm just passionate about blended learning. So I saw it as a real challenge to implement it in the firm.
I think I'd also put it on its head and look at it from the learner's point of view, because we very much were trying to say what is best for the learner here. And if you can get that blend right, it's actually more efficient for the learner, and it's a more fun experience. And we all know that learning takes place better when you're actually having fun, when you're being engaged. So if we can get that, again, coming back to that right blend of being able to have the structured input, but then get that feedback, have that learning from others, have that experience of the learning, and use all these different platforms to just really engage you as a learner. I think the other thing that you mentioned on there, just blended learning actually makes it more flexible for your learner as well. So certainly with our simulation, it is responsive so that they could, if they wanted, sit on a train and do it. I probably don't recommend that very much, but they could do. So it's about giving, I think, people options. The blend gives them some options about different ways to do it. And I know certainly on some of our programs, we have a blend where you can choose. So you can say, I'd like to watch the video, or I'd rather just listen to this, or I'd rather just read the PDF. And again, just having that sense of choice, that flexibility really works.
It's interesting from my perspective that and I think it's the right way, is to use the word blended in a very broad sense. It's when you're pulling together a lot of ingredients rather than getting fixated that it has to have a classroom bit in it or it has to have an E bit in it. Because what you're describing in the PwC example is something that's very diverse and has lots of ingredients, but is actually it is essentially a digital offering, but it feels, it has this feeling of being, because you've got support coming from, from the side, from experts and what have you. So it feels like you're in a social environment, though you're not actually, which is an interesting use of the term.
And the other point that I would make is if your landscape is that the business doesn't understand blended learning and you're introducing that for the first time, they won't understand what you can do with technology. They won't understand that actually you can simulate a classroom, you can simulate a work-based project or a work-based experience. So it's also really important to go out, have it on your iPad, go and show them the partners, and you'll be really surprised at then how you get that engagement from them as well.
Because to bring all that into the scope of simulation, that's not a small effort, is it? And that was not a small budget, was it, Martina?
It was interesting. It was extraordinarily interesting.
You don't have to answer, but I think we can all imagine. There's a question here.
Yes, thanks for sharing. I have two questions. The first being, I think when we look at building a learning culture, right, part of it is looking at the software, which is, changing people's mindset towards blended learning. I wanted to ask whether were there major business processes that you have to tweak when you were working on the project? Because I think most people believe that, the way towards is, blended learning is good. But the thing is, I think sometimes we are also hindered by the processes and structures that we have in place. So my second question is, were there also considerations in thinking about how we can engage the officers, supervisors? Because I think that the potential to unlock that learning application for skills like project management, for example, is after the training program, what happens next? And how can a supervisor actually support that continuous learning and development for the officers?
Okay, so just to recap, a couple of questions there. One is about what impact does blended learning have on the processes? And also, what support do you need in following through after a simulation or after any other sort of blend, really, to make sure that the application happens?
So this goes back to the fact that we wanted to implement a full learning infrastructure to support blended learning. You can't just bring a tool in and push out some e-learning. You're not going to get engagement that way. So we did actually spend a lot of time building the processes that would allow us to develop the blend in-house. So I talked about global and local development processes, which would be similar to those that an instructional design house would have. So there were project management elements of how we built the content, particularly the online content, to make sure that we actually delivered something on time. So we did design those, and we used a third party to help us design those. And then in terms of, after the programme, I mean, it's also, and this is where the Change in Comms plan is really important, you've got to engage your learning teams out in the regions to make sure they understand what blended learning is, that they understand how to talk to the business about it, they understand the individual programs. So, all of the comms, all of the feedback we got from the pilot programs, we pushed right back out to all of the offices and then talked to them about how they would support the learners kind of locally as well.
So I think the other thing is just to look at what you've already got. So what already have you got? What processes or what systems do you have in place that you can perhaps tweak or use? Mm-hmm. So for example, if you've already got line managers who do a bit of coaching of your people, can you add an extra question that they ask, which is, if you're going on this program, this blended learning program, what are you hoping to get out from it? Can you involve them? I think we had a lovely example of using the secretaries. So the secretaries already exist there as somebody who manages the diary. How can you involve them? So I think it is about looking at what we've got, how can we tweak or actually use that to just effectively embed and help the learning, and then support that by your comms, by your I mean, you produced packs and guidance. We would do the similar thing. We produce guidance for people who are around the learners and are supporting the learners. So I think it's, you are going to have to change some things maybe, but actually start from where you are and make the best use of what you're already using.
Thanks, Martina. I have a question over here, and then I'm going to come to the lady at the front, and then here. Okay, so your question?
Yeah, I think the idea of having greater learner engagement and more enjoyable learning is a great goal in theory, and it sounds really good as long as you don't have to worry about the money. But if you're talking about creating multiple learning content on multiple different media so that it allows people to have that choice, how do you actually justify that to the budgeteers rather than here's one package and it's one fit for everybody? I just wondered whether you'd actually done any evaluation to find out if there was any evidence to suggest that having that multiple approach and that flexibility actually did increase performance by the learner.
Okay. I think, again, the way here is to try and be as smart as you can with the money that you've got. So we know that when we produce a video, we're always going to have to produce a transcript for accessibility. So by making sure that we just produce that transcript in a way that actually forms a nice PDF and takes some of the pictures out of the video, we've actually got a nice asset there. If we're producing a video and we've already got the audio there, it's just about adding a few extra bits to actually make it work like that. So it's actually being quite creative sometimes with the way that we actually get these assets so that we're not building, excuse me, again and again and again. So that's my first one, which is don't even go there by using extra money. But if I was having to justify it in terms of why have we created different ways of doing it, I think, again, you're going to have to go back to having a really good business case, which is it significantly going to reduce the time or the cost, or is it going to significantly increase the engagement of the people that actually is going to have a payoff? But my main advice is try not to go there.
Okay, at least a couple more questions, I think, before we finish. Would you like to take the next one?
I have a question for both of you. when you were talking about your learners, I think I see a similar kind of learners. I work at a big school with 17,000 students, and they also sometimes they want to learn, but most of the time they don't want to learn. They're just there, and so we're trying everything to do to get them involved. And but on budget, we don't have a budget. I was allowed last year to buy a particular storyline, and I've go animate, and that's very, very huge that I could buy that, you know, that was very good. That I am here today is a very big thing, because a school doesn't have money. Can you tell me, when you're not thinking about budget, not anything, not thinking about, oh, well, you can't do that, you don't have budget, both of you, one thing that you would always do, even if you didn't have any money for your project, one thing from your projects, the things you learned about blended learning, one thing, what would you always do, both of you?
It's a very challenging question.
Sorry, I go first? I think the one thing that I would always do is build in an element of practice and feedback. I think in your blend, practice and feedback has always got to be there. I mean, being learning professionals, I'm sure we're aware of the importance of having the experience, being able to reflect on it, put it in the bigger picture, and then plan what you're going to do. And so that making your learning go through that whole circle, I think is just very, very important. So I'm saying practice and feedback to allow people to then take that learning on board and then plan about it.
So in other words, if you're short of money, don't truncate the blend by just providing input of knowledge.
Yeah.
Make sure that it's a complete cycle. Yeah, I think it's a very good point. Do you have an answer to the question?
And I think, I mean, what I might just like to say, I know we're not in your situation, but just to give you an idea, I have one e-learning developer and one instructional designer, so we're not a very big team. And it is amazing what you can deliver if you're creative in your design. And one tip I would give you is just make sure that when you are designing, say, a piece of e-learning, just sense check it with your students. Even if it's not fully finished, get them to have a look at it, because, you know, if they don't find it interesting and engaging, then nobody else in the school is going to do it. So that would just be a top tip from me.
Yeah, great piece of advice. And I think we are seeing a lot more of that now, a lot more going out and properly researching what you're doing with your end users, a sort of user-centered design process. And it is definitely yielding results. And it's interesting that a lot of people say that they end up doing something much simpler than they were planning to do, because actually that's what their users want, the simplest possible route to learning the subject. It isn't always more complicated.
Yeah, so I mean, for example, you know, lawyers are fairly kind of straight down the line, and we were looking at introducing a game into one of our programs. And I just thought, you know, I don't think it's going to fly. So we took a few of the lawyers and we showed them the game, and they loved it. So, you know, you don't always know. So go and talk to the end
We all
user.
love a game, don't we? Yeah. Okay, question over here.
Yeah, I had a question for the second speaker, mainly about feedback. We also in my company have a couple of blended learning programs, and sometimes it is challenging to provide, if you're going through a digital interface, to provide interactive feedback with sort of soft skill like things, also for example project management, or we have account management, or you know, different kinds of things. How did you tackle those feedback elements within your program?
I think with soft skills, again, it's being very clear about your point of view and being very clear what's an absolute non-negotiable and what actually is where the subtlety or the blend comes. So, for example, we would hold as a principle that it's important that you engage stakeholders. Okay? So we would say that's absolutely the behaviour we want. But the way that you engage them may be very, very different. The amount that you engage them. So those are the bits where you need to be nuanced and you need to be reflective. So we would be giving our feedback about the things that we absolutely hold as a point of view. Stakeholders should be engaged. So that would be the main bit of feedback. But then the feedback about how you do it might be more nuanced. So we use our expert in the example to actually ask some reflective questions. So it would be broader to actually get the learner to be thinking and reflecting rather than giving an absolute answer. So it would be things like, did you consider that they're learning, that they like to do things very quickly, so that when you were talking to them, were you more clear and precise in your answers? You know, so things like that. Did you consider these things rather than this is the answer? Yeah. So it's really getting very clear about what are those things where you definitely have a point of view, and then for those soft skills, what are some of the questions at least you would hope that somebody would be going through? So almost what's the thinking path you should be going through rather than the absolute answer at the end of the day? So what are the factors to consider rather than the absolute answer? So what is this person's preferred style? How involved are they? What does value mean to them? What does quality mean to this person? So all of those things I would be expecting the learner to be getting, and so they'd be getting feedback about whether they thought about those. Sometimes we're a little bit, some of our feedback as well was if a certain character had already made it clear they didn't like something, if you did something, you got the feedback because next time you met that character, they were cross. They were short with you, so you got it in that as well as an experience rather than just, this person may now be cross with you. Yeah.
I think just echoing that, one of the tips I like to give to people designing interactive materials is just to imagine that you are in a teacher's the wrong word, but you know, you're in a teacher-student relationship, and imagine it was face-to-face, and imagine that had happened in a face-to-face environment, what would you say? So all that's happening is that you're one step removed from that, but it should still feel like you're interacting with a human being, not with a sort of something that's been concocted by a committee. Yeah. And I think if you can create that human experience with the computer disappears and you're just interacting with the author, with the teacher, just like you are with a good book. You're not conscious when you're reading a book that what you're actually doing technically or how the book was produced. You're just interacting with that human being. I think that is a good piece of advice. I think it's a long day. We're probably all a bit tired. If there's one absolutely really, I'm not leaving here unless I ask this question, then is there anybody who's got a burning last question? Okay, but you're very welcome to come up and speak to the speakers, I'm sure, before they go. I'd like us to thank them once more because they have given a lot this afternoon. Excellent. We'll have a lovely evening and see you all tomorrow.